here we are with the Warrior Poet Project podcast. I believe it's number 15, but I've had to suffer through a brief hiatus as I've moved my podcast studio. So here we are in a slightly echoey room at my house with none other than the Vengrin brothers, and they are master poker players and working to be masters at life, as are we all. So pleasure to have you guys here, and looking forward to getting in and exploring some things with you guys.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. So let's talk about poker first.
All right.
That's certainly the largest, brightest feather in your peacock cap here. So let's chat about that. If you guys want to go through briefly kind of some of the highlights of your own careers, let our audience know a bit about yourselves, and take it from there.
Well, I guess I'll start off. I started playing in college when I was on the basketball team, and I would play like $5 games with my friends and stuff like that. I literally never heard about like Texas Hold'em until then, and a buddy of mine introduced me, and I just started playing, and I'm so competitive by nature that I just had to be like the best. So
right.
I just kept going until I was able to break through. But there were a lot of tough times, man, coming up. Like
so I mean, there's a certain point, like, I understand that I want to be the best at everything, and I like playing poker too, but there's never been to me that kind of opportunity to really kind of turn the corner and put the hammer down. There must have been a decision where you were like, either I'm really fucking good at this and I should continue, or I'm just going to doggedly stay with it and make sure I'm good at that. So how did that kind of come about?
I think there were specific circumstances that are unique to our age demographic, which was when we both started learning, we were in college. So you have a bit of disposable income, and
right.
depending on how much studying you want to do, a bit more time on your hands. And that corresponded right with the online poker boom. So you went from being able to play in a casino to being able to play in your dorm room.
Right.
And you went from being able to play maybe 15 or 20 hands in an hour at a casino to playing 100 hands in that same time.
Well, plus you have to have access to a casino, which is
so geography is no longer a problem. So I mean, I'll let Matt take that question, but I think it all started with the fact that we were very lucky to be in university, so we had extra free time, and to have access to playing online, which is something that even 5 years before wouldn't have really existed in the same capacity.
Makes sense.
Yeah, to answer your question, I would say like the turning point was I was in my college dorm room with one semester to go, and I don't suggest this for other people. This is just my path. I woke up and I asked myself, am I happy here? And the answer was no. So I was just kind of learning how to play, and I was like just winning a little, losing a little. Wasn't ever making any serious money. I think I didn't have that much to my name, under 5 figures, and I just told myself, you know what, I'm just going to go to Vegas, and that's it, and I'm just going to be successful, and that was it.
And so you dropped out of school?
Dropped out of school. It was the scariest thing I've done.
So did you know, why did you need to go to Vegas though? You had all the online capability there.
I felt like that's what a poker player would do.
right.
I felt like
that's how Rounders ends.
Exactly, yeah. So Rounders was a great movie, but
it was a good movie.
It was great, man. So that was kind
of. Do you think that movie helped facilitate the poker boom a little?
Oh, I think that would be the third criteria. I think a lot of young people had time. I think online poker was available, and it was a mix between Rounders and the whole Chris Moneymaker winning the World Series of Poker main event in
2003, I think.
2003, I want to say. But he was an accountant who turned, I think, $10 online into a $10,000 entry into the main event, and then he won it for $2 million. And it doesn't hurt that his last name was Moneymaker, as far as marketing goes. But I think that was broadcast on ESPN. It was one of the first times that hole cards were shown, so people could see what the players had.
So that was a big thing.
I think people who are our age who play poker, they reference Chris Moneymaker winning it, Rounders, the movie, or both as kind of what got them into the game.
The televised nature of showing the hole cards, which made it
enjoyable to watch.
Viable spectator sport.
Yeah, and I mentioned that we were in college, but Matt started playing $5 games in college. I did the same thing. I was playing with friends as like an excuse to drink beer on a Friday night.
Right.
So it comes back to, I think people saw it on TV. One friend was interested in Hold'em. Got their group of friends involved, and then I wasn't that person who pushed it, but I was the one who took to it, I think, more than anybody else, and really enjoyed the game and wanted to pursue it and dedicate a lot more time to it.
Yeah, interesting. Well, let me finish here with Matt's story. So then, at a certain point, you make the decision. Now, was it that you're really good at this, or that you were just gonna be really good at this?
I was stubborn. I just said, you know what, I'm not gonna be stopped. I said, I'll hit roadblocks, I'm sure, but as long as I get up and keep going,
right,
nothing's gonna stop
just
me.
dedicated to keep learning, staying on the path.
I was very dedicated. I actually stayed on a friend's couch for 3 months. Until I kind of just.
And then you were just playing online games.
You made a little extra money through a prop bet, right? Involving a waterfall, I think.
Oh yeah, that was just kind of a funny side story. They bet me I couldn't stay under like a waterfall in the pool. You know how they had like the waterfalls coming down?
Yeah.
So they bet me I couldn't stay under that waterfall for I think it was like an hour or something. Made a couple $100, but
yeah. These guys had a little more money than that at the time.
Yeah, at the time,
a little bit of disposable income.
Yeah. But man, it's the great thing about it is you learn every day. It's not the same way every day. Like every hand is different because you're playing different people, and it's just the thing I love about it most is like it's just a constant test of mental fortitude and just trying to figure out strategy that you can best. In business is the same way. You have to figure out a strategy, right, to figure out how to get to the point that you want to get to.
So how much do you think is innate talent, like brain aptitude and skill, as far as on a talent level?
Well, it's hard to say. I would say that anybody could do it, but I would say that my background in sports and liking video games as a kid really had to do with it. People have told me before that poker found me. I didn't find poker, and I kind of believe that. I felt like that's my path. I was a game player by nature. Ever since I can remember. Sports or video games. So I think it translated.
And how does that help? Does that help with the management of emotional issues that come up?
That's one of the things it helps with. The other thing is strategy-wise, I was on the chess team back in 6th grade, and what chess is about, you play chess before?
Sure, I play chess.
So chess, you want to think as many moves ahead as you can, right? That's the whole goal.
Yeah.
And if basically
Which is for me about 3.
That's pretty good, by the way. That's pretty good. Most people can't think that high. But, so in poker, it's the same thing. Poker is just like chess.
Right.
At its core. Which is, okay, if I'm going to do this, what are their options? What can they do? And how can I counteract those options? And then if you keep going further...
and what do I think they're going to do?
Right.
What do I think they're most likely to do?
Right.
And how do I react to that?
So how much of that is, do you think, computation? Like on a backgammon table, the math wizard is the champion. Like I have a friend who's the world backgammon champion.
Yeah.
And he's able to calculate the odds of the dice rolling here and there, and it's purely a mathematical equation for him. And he's just sharper, has a better mind than anybody else, more computer-like, and so he wins. And there's some element to that because you're constantly calculating odds, but there's also the element of reading a human. I mean, backgammon, maybe they move some things in strategy, but it's really about what dice are most likely to come up.
I think more of the variables are known to everybody at the table in backgammon. I think in poker, it's... I think that knowing the math is really important, but you don't necessarily have to do the calculation in your head. If you play enough, there's something called Poker Stove where you can I could put in the hand I had, the hand you had, and calculate what the exact odds were of my winning or your winning.
And is that an iPhone app?
So you can get an iPhone app. But the whole point is when you've played for several years, when you have a hand that you're interested in, you go back and you input the data, and then you find out the percentages. And so the next time you encounter that situation, you know what the odds are. You might not know down to the 5th percentile, but pretty closely what your odds of winning or losing are. But that's only part of it.
Well, because we're humans, we're not machines. I'm sure that there's instances where you guys have a hand that you like.
Yeah.
It's like,
I
like that.
Or you have a far superior hand and you lose, and you react by playing worse going forward, down the line, instead of saying, okay, that happened. It's unlikely that that's going to happen again, but if you're an 80% favorite, still 1 out of 5 times you're going to lose that hand.
Yeah.
And if you react really poorly to that and you lose your mental focus, then that's more important than knowing the odds and kind of the whole idea of skill that you might have. So
that goes back to your emotional control, which you learn in sports. Same way with anything. Any athletic endeavor, you get a bad call, you get something that goes against you. It's
number one.
It's challenging to fight back from that. Throw an interception.
The way I describe it,
chunk up an air ball.
Exactly.
The way I would describe it for Matt is he played basketball through college, so very competitive through sports. And he also played this game called Ultima Online. We both played, which is an online multiplayer game where it's pretty easy to spend 10 hours in front of a computer.
Warcraft.
Right.
So you basically took a highly competitive person and someone who's capable of sitting in front of the computer for long hours, and you combine that into a poker player, and it's pretty much the prototype you would hope for.
It's true, actually.
Yeah.
I got it.
But yeah, so like the odds are important, and the way it works is like, as a professional, over the long term, if you play 1,000 hands where you're a favorite, let's say 10,000 hands. 10,000 hands where you're a favorite, you're going to win the majority of those hands, right? But if you play 2 hands or 5 hands, it could go against the odds, and you could lose.
Sure.
So a lot of the strategy happens like, okay, I think I have the best hand, but this guy has more chips than me, and I'm risking my life. You know, I'm risking my tournament life, which, you know, it's what we specialize in tournaments. And that's just like sometimes way more important than the odds and stuff like that. But that's like something you gain.
Well, sure. If you have
It
seems like if you have a competitive advantage in your innate skills, and you're on a 50-50 hand with someone, it doesn't pay off for you to push in that 50-50 hand.
Exactly.
Because over time you'll grind out the
easier.
victory and get it easier.
Yeah,
playing
exactly.
higher odds.
You're exactly
So
right.
that seems to make sense.
Oh, I think there's also, I mean, for example, a friend of ours, Greg Merson, won the World Series of Poker main event this year. And Michael Phelps, who's from Maryland, so is Greg, was in the stands cheering him on because Michael Phelps plays a ton of poker. And you find that there's a lot of ex-athletes or people who have dealt with injuries who can't really do the sport that they were used to, who have kind of come into poker as maybe the second chapter in their life, like after the sport that they played competitively, because you get that. I mean, your blood starts racing. Like you can break into a sweat if you're not used to bluffing or you're not used to having the best hand and staring someone down. And so you get all these athletes who have really excelled in the game. Like there's ex soccer players from Europe, there's boxers
that were heavyweight champs. Like
it's no coincidence that I think you get that same kind of
MMA guys.
mental competition. But you know if your knee's shot, you can still play poker.
Yeah, I remember I played some home games with some really big hedge fund managers.
Yeah.
And the stakes were not that high, but they would all down to each one of them say, you know, when they're on a $200 hand, you know, competing in a home game in poker, they're more flush than when they're have a $2 million trade, you know, that's highly volatile, going the wrong direction. Their emotions are more engaged.
Matt's moved to Mexico to play poker. I've gone up north. I went to university in Montreal, so I have my girlfriend's family's in Vancouver, and I go up there to play poker so I can play online. And I stayed with her uncle, who was CFO of some large companies, really successful guy, very, very hyper competitive. And you know, I'll be playing $100 or $200 buy-ins, and after playing long enough, you learn how to deal with the emotions. Especially if you're a guest in someone's house, you're not going to blow up or let out that frustration. This guy will be playing a $6 tournament, which for him, you know, that would be me playing like I don't know.
Less than
it would be me playing a 25-cent tournament or something like that. Like for him, it's like him playing like less than a penny.
Yeah.
And he loses. You hear, "Fucking shit, sucker!" You know, this guy caught a flush on the river. And, you know, he's just. You can tell that there's a reason he got to that level in business because of the competitive nature, you know, of his personality. And he's not doing business anymore. You know, he does the market and other things, but poker is an outlet where you can really compete against people and you know, anyone can sign up for that tournament as long as you have that $6 or whatever it is, or $100 or $1,000 or $1 million like there is at the World Series. There was this past summer.
Man, I've been playing 8 years, and still, I get that feeling when I'm in a big hand, and I think that's part of the reason that keeps me in it. You know, it makes me feel alive. Like, there's something about it. It's just like, you know, I would imagine it's how like MMA guys feel when they're in the ring, different but similar, where it's like really competitive. It's like life or death. You know. Because for me, when I lose, it's like death. You know, it's like I die.
Yeah.
It sucks. I hate it. I'm so competitive.
Yeah, no, and it is.
You are as well,
especially
right?
in a tournament. Especially in a tournament, you know, it is a kind of a virtual death, and someone defeated you with their wits and took.
Well, and they didn't necessarily outplay you either. You know,
and that's what everybody tells themselves. But at the end of the day, you know, what do you look at? You look at the chips.
Yeah.
And there's just truth to that. Yes, they got lucky and whatever, but you know. People remember winners.
Well,
and that's how you keep score.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, though, as a poker player, if you made the right decision, then you shouldn't be results oriented about losing that one time, because the wins are going to rack up and you're going to win more than you lose because you made the right choice.
Right.
And I think it's a lot like life in the sense that like you could do everything right and still fall flat on your face.
Sure.
But if you didn't do all that stuff to begin with, you had no chance of succeeding in the beginning, in the first place.
Yeah, and that's, I think, a good way to manage your losses. You just have to say, look, I'm going to play it as good as I possibly can.
And it's 1 out of 1,000 or 1 out of 10,000. It's not like we said. If either of us went and put 50% of our net worth on a poker tournament, we'd be idiots. We're good at poker, but I'd rather put that money on black or red on the roulette table.
Yeah.
Because the odds of beating 8,000 people or whatever the main event would be they're so skewed against you. Mm-hmm. But if you can play that same tournament 1,000 times or 10,000 times, then your skill's going to win out and you're going to see real profit, and it would make more sense, which is why bankroll management is almost as important as the skill in poker.
Right.
Like not putting too much of your money at risk to the point where you risk financial ruin, but also you can't mentally handle the loss.
It's the same thing with trading. You know, I was my father was a futures trader, commodities trader, and I would open small accounts and just basically get minimum contracts, mini contracts, and things that I could kind of play around with. And really, the two things you have to manage are fear and greed.
Yeah,
it's just the name of the game, and your stack, because natural volatility will take you out if if you have too much of a stake at play. You got to be able to absorb it, and that's why most people lose at these casinos playing anything.
Because they go too high.
Because they go too high. I mean, if you're you sit down at a $25 blackjack table with $100, you're going to lose.
Yeah, exactly.
Almost every time, even if you're playing perfectly, which gives you 46% odds.
But if you sit down at let's say a $1 table existed and you have that $100, you don't get that same rush as part of the reason. You know what I mean? It's like that's kind of the whole.
I'm wasting my goddamn time. Yeah. But poker,
so it's really interesting to find that mix. I mean, that's more when it comes to gambling. With poker, you can calculate a little bit more.
So let's say you have Candyland on one side of the luck scale, where you're just rolling dice, and you just happen to be the machine that's part of that. It's all luck. Yeah. And then you have chess on the other side. No luck, zero luck.
All skill,
All skill. So where do you think poker? Let's say Candyland's at 1, chess is at 100. Where do you think poker kind of falls?
Are we talking one poker tournament or 10,000? I think that's the real distinction. With one poker tournament,
overall, I think probably.
I mean, I guess the thing would be every time you sit down. I mean, overall, luck should even out. So it should be we're talking about the margin being skill. If there's any skill margin and you extrapolate it over time, then skill value goes to 100%. So we have to say it a shorter term.
Yeah.
Sitting down in a poker tournament or a poker.
I just said I think if I had my last $100, I would rather put that on black or red than put it in a poker tournament where there's 2,000 entrants or something like that.
Right.
I think my odds would be better.
But a home game with 7 people, would be better.
I'll put my money on poker every day.
Or an online game.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would say it's like a 78.
78.
Yeah.
So it's pretty high.
I would say
the skill quotient is pretty high. That means someone who's considerably worse than you would win 1 out of 5 times against you.
Well, if we're playing, let's say it this way. So let's put it this way. It's a little easier to do. So if we're playing 5, let's say we're playing 10 times. Okay. I would probably, if there was a novice that I was playing, I would probably beat them. I would imagine for sure more than 5, or else I would not be a winning player.
Right.
I would say probably 6 to 7 out of 10 times.
Yeah.
At the high end, maybe 5. The range would be 5 to 10, but more skewed towards 10, I would imagine.
Well, that's not exactly what we do though. So as poker players, the real end, so we play mostly poker tournaments. So let's say there's 1,000 people in a tournament, 10% get paid, but only the final 9 really get significant money. And out of that 9, only the top 3 really make the money that you can sustain a career essentially. But if we're heads up with a player, like there's not that much that you can do to leverage your skill. I mean, you can outplay them for sure, but it's what Matt said, maybe 6 out of 10 or 7 out of 10.
Heads up is a kind of a unique beast. Anyways.
But for example, like every Sunday there's a $200 tournament with 7,000 people that gets about $200,000 for first. 10th place probably gets $6,000. So you're talking about a massive swing in profitability, just like from the pay jumps from 10th to 1st. So a good poker player, human nature makes people slow down and play more conservative because they want to move from the 4K to the 8K and then from the 8K to the 16K so that they can move up profit-wise, the profit ladder. But the good player says, everyone else is getting more conservative, I'm going to raise every hand and I'm going to put the fear of God in these people because they're afraid of busting in 10th place and winning only 4K, so they'd rather almost make a worse poker decision, but potentially survive longer.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been in the summer in Vegas where it'll be towards the end of the night and someone will have like 6 big blinds, which is a very small amount. That's where you go all in or you fold. Like you don't have any room to really do anything differently. And someone will fold and show me a really good hand, and they'll say that they folded because if they survive to the next day, they can tell their wife they made day 2. And it'll rationalize them coming to Vegas and spending $1,000 or $2,000. And like
so human factors.
The reality is they're shooting themselves in the foot. They're costing themselves the chance of making any money in exchange for the equity of being able to tell their wife that they made the second day and like to rationalize why they're in Vegas. So I think a lot of poker, there's the skill element, but there's also just taking advantage of human nature and figuring out when someone's scared and taking advantage of that, and figuring out when someone isn't scared and slowing down a little bit because they're not going to slow down.
Yeah, there was and one example of that is back before I hit any big scores, I was in the Sunday Million that Jared was talking about. It was a $500 buy-in, and first was like $250,000, and 18th was maybe like $2,500, right? So obviously the money's all on top. So I had a choice there. This was one of the biggest points in my career where I had a turning point. Was I said, you know what? All these guys are playing a little conservative now, and
so how many people were left?
So 18 out of like 2,000.
Where was your stack?
I was like kind of in the middle to the lower percentile.
Right.
And I said to myself, you know what? I could either just play regular poker and hope to get lucky, or I could just take this and I could just raise every hand. And I was like, you know what? What's the best strategy for combating people that are not playing aggressively? Well, it's to play aggressively against them. So that's what I did. And I ended up chopping it. It was my first big score. We chopped up the prize money with 5 left. I ended up getting like 130,000 or something like that. Which is way better than 2,500 if I would have just been.
Well, the whole point,
sure.
If it's 2,500 for 18th place, you might have to finish 18th out of 2,000 people 100 times to make the same amount of money you'd finish if you do 5th place once. Exactly. So it always pays to err on the side of aggression and to try to get those big payouts, because winning a tournament once is way better than taking 9th place 10 times.
Yes. And so we haven't really gotten your background. You had a pretty strong finish in the World Series early on, right? Is that right? Or was it another big tournament?
Yes and no. I mean, I'm 2.5 years younger than Matt. And it's interesting, like, Matt was really, really exceptional when it came to seeking out quality poker players and seeking out advice and talking to them about strategy. I was incredibly lucky in the sense that I started playing a lot of online poker similar to when Matt did. I guess a year or two later, because I would bug him for $10 or $20 so I could play like a $1 tournament. And
every week,
and in his defense, he'd tell me that I shouldn't do that, and then send me the money every time. So he was trying to teach me a lesson, but also being a good older brother. And so I had the luxury of learning from Matt. Was almost like a filter for all these other excellent poker players, and I was able to go to like one person directly, my brother, and ask him questions about the game. It all started, I won I was in college in Montreal, so there was already an exchange rate. $1 US was worth about $1.30 in Canadian money. So I took a $5 buy-in and I won it for about $1,500, which made me feel like the richest kid on campus. That I kept 500 online, I cashed out 1,000, that turned into 1,300, which was drinking money for the semester. And built on it from there. My biggest win came the year before the World Series. I took first place in a similar tournament to what Matt was discussing, a $200 with about 4,000 people in it, for a decent 6-figure score. That was the real tipping point. That was when I went from explaining that I was a poker player, to my girlfriend's parents and to friends, to friends being like, you're the poker player, like your reputation kind of precedes you a little more, and you go from being a degenerate to being a professional poker player.
That's a fine line, by the way.
And as a poker player, I felt that confidence a year or two before I arrived, or whatever you want to call it. But unless you have the results to back it up, it's hard to explain that you're doing something it's numbers, you're doing calculations, percentages, and you're kind of making the right decision over and over again.
Tell me about what the experience was in the World Series. I think that's an interesting story because you played for like 7 days.
Yeah. So actually, what happened was, this was the first World Series of Poker after Black Friday, which is when the Department of Justice indicted a lot of the poker sites and essentially kicked them out of the U.S. market. So it was a transitional period. I wasn't, I knew I wanted to keep playing poker, but I just had bought a condo in Austin, in Texas. My girlfriend has a great job in Texas, so it was hard for me to just up and move for 6 months or a year out of the country. So that World Series was a big kind of transition point for me to figure out if poker was something I wanted to pursue or if there was other options. And I ended up selling action. I sold about 40% of myself in the main event, the $10,000 big end of the tournament, kind of culminating buy-in.
So who's buying? Who's buying at that point for you?
Well, the CFO from Vancouver I mentioned wanted in a little bit. Matt bought some action, and
so
then
friends and family type of.
Friends and family, and then you can sell online. I was lucky that the one friend and family wanted a big chunk, and I was able to sell smaller pieces to other poker players online. My brother took some, and then I basically broken even on the whole summer. Like, I had one score that made up for all my losses, so I had a little bit of my own money that I was willing to invest. And that tournament is the epitome of all of the intangible skills you need in poker, like the patience you require, the mental strength, kind of the thinking ahead. The skill is important, but it's just, I busted out on the end of the 6th day, and at the end of the 8th day is when they make the final 9. So I finished 73rd out of 7,000 people.
Yeah, he was on TV. It was pretty cool. We actually
was on TV for a bit, which is when I busted out. But it was one of those situations where it was phenomenal to go that far. I learned a lot about my own poker game. It really helped me in the future for selling action because people saw that I had a solid result that kind of vouches for my skill. But yeah, it was a day in, day out grind. And for me, what got me through it was I wasn't thinking about the first place prize pool. Every single hour I would set a new goal for my chip stack. So if you start with 30,000 chips, my goal is to get to 35,000, which is completely attainable. Once you hit that, the goal is 50,000. Once you get to 50, the goal is 75.
So setting some short-term goals.
It kept me to play poker for 8 days. You need to have those short-term goals because you're going to lose focus otherwise. And to be completely honest, at the end of the 6th day, I would have made a different decision than I did to bust out. If in hindsight I would have made a different decision, but it's just.
So what was the hand that took you out?
So I actually got knocked out by the guy who won it all, the guy who won $8.5 million 2 months later. But it was. It's probably a little bit too much detail, but basically a really aggressive German guy raised, another really aggressive German guy re-raised him, and I had a low pair and about 20 big blinds, which is. In that tournament isn't panic mode because the structure is so good that you can really survive a little longer.
Yeah.
And the second guy, the guy who re-raised, had raised about 15% more than he normally did on his re-raises. So in my mind, I thought he was really frustrated by the aggressive German guy who was raising every single hand. Mm-hmm. So I thought I could go all in, get the first guy who probably had nothing out, and then get the re-raiser out of the pot as well because I thought he was just frustrated with the first guy. Right. And the reality is that might have worked, but it wasn't worth it. Like the risk reward wasn't there. Where, for example, I busted 73rd. If I had folded that hand, I would have someone else would have busted in the next 10 minutes, and I would have bumped up $18,000 from $90,000 to $180,000.
So it was a costly, fairly low to moderate risk play.
So the reward wasn't worth it for the amount of risk.
Right. So what happened?
So the German guy called with Ace King, the first raiser.
Oops.
Which actually I had a low pair, so I have actually a 53% chance with a lot of dead money in the pot. So that would have been great. But the second guy thought for about 5 or 6 minutes, almost folded, and then he called with queens, which he's calling with queens, kings, aces, and maybe ace king, but he's folding jacks, tens, and nines. So it was right on the cusp where I actually would have beat ace king.
Yeah, if the guy folded with queens
if the queens folded, which he very well could have. Like, he was really pained to do it, and he made a great call. He tripled up, and he ended up winning the entire tournament.
So that was a key moment.
So it was a really key moment for him. I actually talked to him this past summer, and it was really funny because he said that he would have rather won a $5 million pot in Macau where no one knew about it than win the $8 million and be the face of the World Series of Poker and deal with all the publicity and
you're a real deal celebrity if you.
Absolutely. And
nobody remembers second.
His name is Pius Hines. He's a great guy, like really, really good guy, and I was happy for him. But obviously, I would have much rather spiked a 4 and won the turn or won the hand and gone on farther.
But that's just like kind of tournament poker in a nutshell. It's like one decision over 7 days can be it.
Sure.
And that's why I love poker so much, is because I like that. I like kind of trying to figure out how not to mess up.
So and that's been a real part of your journey, is kind of mastering the emotional, kind of intangible, almost spiritual, you could say, side of poker. So what's a little bit of some of those lessons that you've learned along your journey there?
Well, there was maybe I can sum it up in one hand, and then I'll talk more about it. Last summer during the World Series is sort of the first summer I started like listening to my instincts, like just listening to the first instinct I had, and that was what I did.
And this is after, you're saying last summer, you'd had a lot of big scores and a lot of big successes. I think you look online, what are you at, 1.6 million in earnings or something like that?
Like 3.
3 million? I'm sorry, I cut you in half. I cut you in half. Maybe that was a while ago when I checked those stats. But it's, and probably only a portion of that has been, since then. So this is a fairly late decision.
Yeah, well, I have kind of a mentor figure that kind of bounce ideas off, and one of the things was that he told me that kind of rung true with me was you always got to reshape your game. You can never be comfortable with it.
Right.
So
do you think that finally you got to the point where your instincts were good enough to trust, or should you have been trusting them all along?
Well, I probably should have been trusting them all along, but that's sort of the first time when I realized, like, you know what, like maybe there's more, for me at least, maybe there's more to this game than odds and hands and situations. Maybe it's like, maybe like you can kind of tell what's going to happen in your gut and maybe just avoid those situations, right? So one of those situations that happened last year was I had a mediocre hand, and I had the dealer button, which is the most powerful position you can have. And
last act,
right? You get information before anybody else. And I had Jack 8 of diamonds, which is one of my favorite hands, and I raised there probably 95% of the time, just in general.
Only diamonds?
Any suited, or even maybe opposite. Well, actually, that's a lot. I don't want to tell people I'm such a maniac, but anyway, I'm a maniac. All right, fine. Anyway, so I normally would raise there like 9.5 times out of 10, and something in my head was just like, fold. So there's a big hand behind you. Just literally, that's what happened in my head, and I was like, all right, you know what? Instead of going against that, like I've been doing my whole life, I'm just gonna fold it, and that's it. And what happened was I folded, and the small blind folded, and the big blind chuckles. And I'm like, uh-oh, was I right? And he flips over 2 kings. And I'm like, he's like, oh, I never get action on these. And I'm just like, I didn't say a word. I was just like, holy crap.
Yeah.
And it's not like I do that every hand. That's just like something that came. So I just tried to become
So at that point, all right, at that point, is this you reading some kind of subtle cues that you're observing but not cognitive of, or is this something a little bit more esoteric where you're kind of reading an energy field that's almost non-perceptible?
I would say the latter. Definitely the latter, because it's just a weird thing, man. It's like it's weird even talking about it sometimes, because most people are like, what are you talking about, right? But it's like I feel like now I'm out of my head to the point where I can kind of start noticing what's going on around me, and like the energy or whatever you want to call it. And I think that, it's mostly just a feeling I get. And it has nothing to do with what they're doing. It has nothing to do with their cards. It has nothing to do with any of that.
Yeah.
It just has to do with, do I feel good about this hand? Or do I not? And that's it. It's like that simple.
Well, that was the biggest mistake the guy who flipped his hand over did was you should never provide other players with positive reinforcement. You know, he encouraged my brother to make that sort of fold. He showed him that he made the right fold by showing his two kings. And like as a poker player, you should try to guard the information you give out as much as possible.
Right. Or strategically play it. But I want to get back to this topic because I actually had a long discussion with Sorrel Mitzi about this, and he is very much adamant. At least he was at the time. I know he's been doing some different things, and his perspective is shifting as he goes. But he was very much on the mechanistic side of poker. Like I would say that he would say, "You just got lucky." You know, there was no.
And I would probably take that.
He would say basically, you know, you have those instincts all the time, like a psychic or something like that. You know, it's just some kind of. But you know, I've felt and seen things that just
can't explain.
It's hard to explain. You know what I mean? And even doing things that are very much luck based, you know, in a casino, you get weird things that happen. You get weird instincts that, oh, this is exactly what's going to happen. And then it happens. And then there was actually a time I was actually waiting for Rogan in the MGM casino. And I was, you know, pretty alert. I hadn't seen him in a while. I was looking forward to hanging out. But I was killing time. He was about 15 minutes away. So I'm watching this roulette wheel go. And I say, usually no numbers come to my head. I suck at it. I lose at that thing constantly. I forget what number it was, but let's say it was 17. I was like, oh, the next one's going to be 17. Boom, 17. Like, fuck. I should have bet on that. You know, I'm just sitting around killing time. And the next one I was like, next one's 32. Boom, 32. I'm like, fuck. And these numbers were coming easily. Yeah. Like that doesn't normally happen. You know, it's not like I'm all the time looking at a roulette wheel and saying a number. And so by sheer odds of me doing this several thousand times, you know, it's going to happen where I'm right. And those are the ones I'm going to remember. I just can't accept that. Like the numbers came in. And the same thing happens with craps. Like you'll get on a roll, you'll get a feeling where you just know that you're going to win.
We played in Atlantis
that time. We played in Atlantis. Yeah, exactly. So there's weird stuff that goes out there. And I know, you know, people can bring up there's long-standing challenges where you get $1 million if you can prove some kind of supernatural event on one side. But then you have the other people with these random number generators on the other side. And this whole conflicting mess, but I tend to agree with you that there is a little something more to the fabric of just pure odds.
I think it's when you attach meaning to something, it's harder to see it. You know, like for example, if you were betting big money on there, I mean, I don't know, you're probably comfortable betting, but if you're betting, it's different than if you're just looking, kind of just
totally.
You know what I mean?
Totally.
And I think it's like you get kind of clouded. For me personally, I get clouded when the what's the best way to say this? When I am focused on my intent rather than the outcome, it seems to happen better. Like it seems to be more clear to me.
And it's hard to not focus on the outcome when you have too much money.
Exactly. And that's why I think a lot of people slow down in tournaments like we were talking about before. It's like when there's 18 left, why do they suddenly just...
When it's most important to not slow down, why do they?
And it's like, look, if you're going to enter a tournament, and I even do it sometimes still, but I have to catch myself and say, you know what, if you want this, take it. That's what I say every time. If you want it, take it. Stop, you know, just expecting that you playing the same poker they're playing, you're going to win, because that's just luck.
Right.
That's luck, right? So I definitely think there's something to it, and I definitely think every day I'm picking up something new, and I know that, you know, the guy that kind of is my mentor, he just knows these things. Like, he's like just in tune with it. And it's hard to explain, but he just, like, he's called me. I told Jared this the other day, and Jared and I differ on this, you know. He's more mathematical. I'm more kind of, I don't know what you want to call it, just feel-based or whatever.
Flow-based or whatever.
Flow-based, exactly. What was I just saying? I just lost my
mentor calling
Your mentor.
Yeah, so he called me twice when I was having really bad days, like going through a breakup, and one time not going through a breakup, just random. And he called me twice, and the first thing he said to me was, "What's wrong?" And something had happened that day both times where I was just like,
sure,
you know, and I was just like, wait, what? First thing he said was, "What's wrong?" It's like there's some level that I don't think we've tapped into just yet.
Well, there's definitely that level, and you know, I think it's not enough of a big deal has been made about even the physics discovery of quantum entanglement. Where, are you guys familiar with that?
No, let's hear it.
Enlighten us.
Well, they basically take two linked photons, and these photons rotate in a certain way, and so they can separate them by put one in Germany, put one in the United States, move it all the way across the world. They can influence one of the photons to change its direction, and the other linked photon will instantly, with no time lapse, change its direction as well.
Wow.
So it's called quantum entanglement. So, and it's just a proven fact of physics. So everybody treats this like, oh, look at this quirky thing. Look at this old quirky, funny little fact. Well, how the fuck is that happening? Like, there needs to be a further explanation. It's not just an anomaly and you put it in the anomaly box. What's that saying is that there's another dimensional plane that doesn't have time, that doesn't have space, that doesn't require other things that can affect communication. That's the only plausible explanation for quantum entanglement, but nobody wants, on the scientific front, wants to push it that far. Mm-hmm. But then other people will look at it and maybe want to take it too far, and say something else. I mean, it's certainly, I think, the bridge between science and spirituality they're going to start finding connections.
I think so too.
And it's just, we're a little bit early on that. But, you do enough experiences like I have out in the jungle in the middle of nowhere, and things start to feel a lot more like Avatar, where, everything is connected. And then you notice a discovery like quantum entanglement, and you start to see it, and it starts to poke holes in this scientific theory of, pure materialism and cause and effect on this plane.
I think it's just getting out of your own way. I mean, there's so many thoughts that roll through your head on a daily basis. You're so caught up, you can't actually just stop and smell the roses, as they say. You know what I mean?
Well, that's living in the moment. That's Eckhart Tolle power of now. Being perfectly present, which is important for poker. Or as I know you're a coach for some MMA fighters. We have time, we'll get into that. Mm-hmm. But the crux of as far as from what I've talked to you about that you're teaching them is just be fully present.
It's all about the moment.
I mean, the power is like the fucking book, the power of now. It is in the now.
Yeah, that's one of the things I told Martin Kentman when I was talking to him about working together. I said, I saw you in one of your fights, go somewhere else.
Yeah.
That's what I said to him.
Yeah.
And he knew what I was talking about. He didn't want to admit it, but he kind of knew. That's why I think he accepted, the coaching.
That's it. And I've seen the opposite where one of my best friends is Roger Huerta.
Yeah.
And he has when he's had his best fights is when he's gotten the rawest. And so that fight happened with Clay Guida. He was getting kind of beat up. He took some hard shots. In the start of the third round, he just got to a place where his shields were completely down, and he was fully just a raw fighter in the moment.
It was just being.
And he was just
doing what he was taught to do.
He came back and he won that fight in dramatic fashion in that third round.
No pushover either.
No pushover. And at that moment, you could see he was shook up, because he allowed something fully uncontrolled in his being. And he had a tough past and a lot of emotional challenges and things. Something completely uncontrolled to come out, and he was emotional and that was one of his greatest moments. And then, towards the latter part of his career, he hasn't had as much success. And I think part of the reason why is he's been scared of that raw moment where he lets all of his guard down and just is able to release what's truly inside, which
Absolutely.
is a very tumultuous experience.
Well, that's kind of what it all is about. I mean, with Martin, I won't go into specifics, but he was very open. And that's hard to do as a fighter sometimes. Mm-hmm. You're a fighter. You're not supposed to be emotional. You're not supposed to let people know what's really going on inside your head. But I'll tell you what, man, there was something about him when he let that stuff out and just was there.
Yeah.
It was great.
It's interesting. So that applies to, all elements, I think, is just really being present, being in the moment.
Well, you could argue that there's no past when you're really in the moment
And no future.
Yeah, exactly. And because when you're not entangled by past things, then you're free to be, you're free to recreate the book that you're doing. You know what I mean? I was talking about poker, you always have to recreate, wherever you're in business, right? You got to recreate your site every once in a while, right?
Sure.
To maximize it. So it's a really interesting topic that I think is getting more notice as of recent, and I'm just psyched to be a part of it.
Do you think there could be a almost like an X-Men situation where someone gets really fucking good. And
Like the Matrix.
yeah, right, exactly. Or any one of these superhero kind of scenarios where if this phenomenon is real and if people are pushing back towards openness. I mean, it's possible that this happened in the past, and like the stories of wizards and these mystics like Rasputin and other these different people, and there's still stories now. I haven't really investigated any on a particularly personal level, so I can't speak to them, but you hear of like John of God and all these people. Who knows what the fuck they're doing, if it's anything real. And, you know, there's these Chinese healers that are supposedly materializing medicine out of their hand. I'm pretty sure they're David Blaine, and they're just, you know, putting on a show. But, you know, I do believe in the underlying phenomenon. So it seems reasonable to believe that someone could come along that really can intuit and read, you know, the energy field, whatever you want to call it, and really dominate poker. If they decided to. You know?
Look, I mean, the thing about that, and you're onto something for sure, because with poker, and it can't just be the odds. The same guys are deep every time. You got a handful of guys that are winning all the money.
Well, I'd also argue there's probably quite a few successful poker players that are probably mild Asperger's, or, you know, have something that would be characterized as their brain functions in a different way from a normal human being. And I mean, you could look at Asperger's as a mental illness, but you can also look at a lot of the incredible inventions and creativity that can come out of something like that. So I mean, you could argue that we are here, or even a lot of prophets or people who could see the future back hundreds of years ago. You could also argue that they were just what we define as mentally ill now, and it's what kind of label you want to put on that, whether it's someone who can see another dimension and interact with that and bring it to this world, or whether it's someone who literally just has, you know, a few chromosomes or molecules that are
it's
incorrect, or
you know,
whatever you want to
because
call it.
You know, I've been twice to a certain state of being, and I had to have help. I'm not naturally that gifted at getting there on my own, but twice. Once when the Iboga experience, and once in particular during the ayahuasca experience, where I felt like I was tapped into fully a different plane, where I could see things in a crystal clear level, get answers, get access to that on a certain level. I'd be interested for just scientific inquiry to see how far that extends, you know, when you're in that state. But the problem is, it's so hard to reproduce that state. You don't know you're in it until you're in it. You know what I'm saying? So the study design doesn't make sense. You know, like they did some study where, I think it was actually on the Joe Rogan Experience, they had some physicists trying to debunk being in the zone. He was trying to debunk being in the zone. So his criteria for being in the zone, they were doing it with basketball, was you make 2 shots in a row, you know, are you more likely to make your third? Well, I can make 10 fucking shots in a row. Doesn't mean I'm in the zone. Like, I'll tell you when I'm in the goddamn zone. You know, like, don't look at the fucking stat sheet and try and tell me when I'm in the zone. It's an intangible thing. I can miss a shot and be in the zone. That's not the point. You know, usually the results follow.
Yes.
But being in the zone is a state of being that is subjective. You know, and so these study designs fail, and they're like, see, there's no such thing as the zone. You know, like, you're fucking out of your
You haven't
mind.
seen Steph Curry drop 54 at the Garden the other night? There's a zone, man.
Even a really small example is, I was over the holidays.
Is that a WNBA player? Who's Steph Curry?
No.
Del Curry's son. He's like a really good three-point shooter.
Yeah, he hit, I think it was 12 of 13 from 3 during that game.
We'd have to ask him, but there's a very good chance.
Well, man, even this past holiday, I was in Costa Rica. I was in the pool with a friend of mine, and we were throwing the frisbee around. And this little kid who's like 8 or 9 years old, he comes over and we're throwing to him. He's catching it, but he's afraid to throw it back to us.
Right.
We try to work on it. We try to get him to do it, and eventually, he's ready to throw it to us, and he goes, "I'm gonna fail, or I'm gonna mess it up," and he throws it, and it goes 5 feet to the right and hits a wall, and he failed and he messed up, and we literally sat him down and said, don't put that out there. Like, just clear your mind and just throw the frisbee. And for the rest of the day, he had a great time, and he never threw it off again. But it just shows how powerful it can be if you tell yourself you're gonna fail, or if you have those fears, how it manifests itself. It does become a reality.
Sure.
As far as like the connection, or a greater human connection goes, I've always joked, and I think there's a hint of truth to it, that I think I would be great at playing poker if I was on mushrooms. Because you just feel like a little more connected. You feel a little more aware of what everyone's doing, and you pick up on those cues and those like very, very subtle.
And why haven't you tried it? Is the better question.
I actually am not sure. That would be a more reasonable experiment, I think, than finding out who's in the zone.
Yeah, for sure. Because that's, I think, it's at least gives you a little bit of a leg up.
A buddy of.
So you guys are volunteering, I see, right now. All right, we're gonna run this experiment. You've heard it here on the Warrior Poet Project.
But even
we're going to sponsor these guys. One time, randomly, for those who are looking to hate on our strategy.
Whatever one I win, I'll just say. But no, Matt finished final 5 or 6 in a 4-handed tournament this summer.
None.
Or what did you finish?
Like 23rd.
Oh, I'm sorry, 23rd. He went deep in it, and one of the guys who is a mutual friend of a lot of my friends, who also went deep, and I think he finished in the final 6 or 7. The entirety of the second day, which is when you really are moving chips and you're making like true moves against some of the better players, he had a weed brownie before his session.
Right.
And he just said he was just in the zone. Like he was just relaxing the whole time.
Glad that works for him, because for me, that's one fucking substance. When I eat weed, not that I've ever done that, of course, it's illegal. Allegedly, when I eat weed, fuck, man, it's like it just does not treat me well.
Well, I would like it.
Like it's just kind of distracting a little bit. It's fun because it's an altered state.
I think with that, it depends how often you do it or how.
But like Joe Rogan or Joey Diaz can eat the fuck out of some weed, and they're like in the zone and smooth and good to go. You know?
I would almost argue that taking weed brownies is almost like a very mild mushroom trip. Like you know,
wrong, denied. Try again. Come again another time.
I guess it hits everyone differently, but I don't react to weed brownies. So if I take a bunch, I just kind of get that body tingling feeling. Like my mind isn't really racing, but if I've taken a small amount of mushrooms, I kind of can feel it in my fingertips, but my mind is pretty clear.
Yeah,
and that's what I mean when I'm comparing the two.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it
comes down to dose, I think, when you talk about any of that stuff.
I mean, it's really a curious thing. I'd be very interested to kind of test that out. And there's the other, I mean, mushrooms is one way, but, you know, obviously mushrooms are very malleable, and I think that's one of the things that would make it good for this experiment, would be that you can kind of direct the attention of mushrooms, I feel like, to whatever you're doing. You can direct it to dancing, you could direct it to introspection, you can direct it to, that's why they are a pretty good, a pretty good recreational psychedelic if you're going to use it in that way, which I always encourage people to use them in a spiritual context. But like ayahuasca, for example, no recreational use for that at all. Nobody just does that and it's like, hey, let's just have a fucking blast tonight. You know, I mean, you gotta really prepare yourself for that. But mushrooms would be a good candidate. I think a small dose of iboga could be a really powerful one too, which is actually legal in Canada. Oh, snap. So, and Mexico. Oh, yeah. So you see, so then, you know, I don't think, do they actually play face-to-face tournament? Because one of the issues I've had, I think these things would get kind of wacky and not work as well on an online.
I completely agree.
Because the only time I'm at all good at poker is because I played some online and I played some face-to-face, and I'm decent at face-to-face poker, and it's because I feel like I'm in touch with a natural sense of weakness or strength. And so actually, players that are pretty good, not like super excellent players, they always beat me, but like players that are better than me, probably, I'll actually play better than an often beat because I'm relying on them to give me the cue of how strong they are compared to me. And I can read that pretty accurately, and they can read the rest of the table and understand that. So it's like I'm tapping into their knowledge base by determining what their thoughts are of strength and weakness, and then acting on that cue. But if I'm playing with a bunch of duffs, you know, they don't know if they're strong or weak. They can think they're strong as shit and really they're weak. So if I tap into them, they don't know what they're right or wrong.
My girlfriend and I will have like a $10 poker tournament and we invite friends over and everyone assumes that I'm just going to queen up. And you can't play against people who don't know what they're doing.
It's a good
you can't outplay someone who has no clue what they're doing. Like there was a time where I once thought someone was really weak, so I bluffed them with nothing. They painstakingly thought for like 2 or 3 minutes and finally called. They thought they had a pair of 10s and they had a flush.
So they called me with the worst hand, and they did it anyway. And then it turned out they didn't even know what they had. So you can't really trust a novice player like when you're getting a read that they're nervous or they're excited or not.
Yeah. And again, not caring about the money is another big thing. I was out. I was with Heath and Sarah out in Vegas, and I was playing a tournament at I think the Fitz, some really shitty casino in Old Town, and I was more there to just hang out with them. And so I was having a lot of drinks, and they wanted to do this, so I was going to do it, and that was my way to sit at the table and bullshit with them and hang. And I was playing completely loose. Like, I didn't give a fuck. Like, I was just as happy to bust and whatever. But I ended up chopping that tournament with the winner, because I was just loose, and I was playing. The bluffs were coming easy. It was like just doing whatever I could, and that was a real eye opener for me.
Isn't that like the key, like life though? It's like if you don't attach yourself to an outcome, you're way more free to play and to create and to have fun, right? So it's like you didn't care that time.
Yep.
If you cared that time, I would argue you may have chopped it, but it would have been right.
No way.
No, you would have just wanted to be at the table. You would have like winded down and just not had the.
Well, no, I would have started thinking about it.
Exactly,
I would have gotten nervous. I would have hesitated when the move. It's not about what you do, but it's about how you do it. When you pick this up and your heart's not even racing, and you're like, fuck it, I'll move that stack in there.
Yeah.
That's what you do when you're really
Oh, yeah.
So just acting like that is the difference. Whereas if I was tight, I would have been thinking about it. I should have left. No, I should. Oh, it's too late. Oh shit, it's too late. Oh fuck it, I got to do it anyways. And then you move in, and it's a totally different play.
When I lived in Montreal and I was first starting out, there were often times where I would start playing at 9 p.m. after a night class and register through midnight or 1 a.m. And there was a midnight tournament, a $75 buy-in that would get about $6,000 for first, a few hundred people in it, and it would end at 4:30 or 5 in the morning. I have won that tournament more than any other tournament in my life. I think I won it 4 or 5 times because around 3 a.m. my brain would just shut off and I would just be clicking buttons, and like it wasn't like I was just getting lucky, but that thought process in between what I knew I wanted, what Matt talked about, which is going with your gut or just like your first read. There was just no second thoughts in my head, and I was just clicking buttons, and then before you know it, your head's up.
Yeah, that Zen principle of no mind.
You know, interesting to build on that. In my previous games, playing like 10, 12-hour days sometimes, I used to be exhausted at the end of it because I was thinking about everything, and I was just being a cerebral poker player. What's changed in the past year, and I talked about this with my mentor, it's hilarious. It's like I played a 12-hour day, and I was fresh at the end of it, just completely fresh. And I was like, "What is this?" He's like, "Well, thinking hurts your head a lot, man." Like basically, he said, like stop thinking.
He called you stupid.
One thing your mentors said to you, then you reiterated to me, which I've always kind of remembered, and I was reminded. The other day I was out, and somebody who's known me through other friends. I've never really known him. He looks at me and he looks me pretty earnestly in the eye and says, "So I have a question for you." He said, "So how does it feel?" And I know what he meant. Onnit's been very successful, and especially for this Austin group, he's seen me basically move from a variety of different projects, Fleshlight, other different things, to having a very successful company, and obviously, my girl's fantastic. I have many blessings in my life. But I think the answer he wanted was, "Oh my God, it's fucking like unreal. I would have never, But the truth of the matter is, it took me getting to the point where I really expected this to happen, and this was no surprise to me. And that's like the secret, and I do feel very blessed. But the secret for me is that I always kind of knew this was coming.
It wasn't a big surprise.
It wasn't a surprise, and that was something that your mentor said to you, and you can finish off the story, but basically what he said to you about winning the big tournament. I think what he said, basically, he said, you asked him, I don't know if you asked him, but when am I going to win the World Series? And he told you, he said, you win the World Series when it's not that big a deal for you to win the World Series.
Exactly, yeah. So he basically said, like, you can't put meaning on things. Like, you just have to, like, be there. You have to just, like, just trust yourself. And when you focus on, what we were talking about before, when you focus on just the process, the end comes. And it's just the meaning we put on it. It brings me back to high school. When you see that beautiful girl that you think you can't have, you put her up on this pedestal, and there's no pedestal. You're creating the pedestal. Mm-hmm. You could just go up to her and say, hey, you want to go out? And she'd probably say yes, because all the other guys were looking at her and saying nothing to her. Yeah. And it kind of goes back to that. It's like, and I still am guilty of this sometimes. I still place a lot of meaning on tournaments sometimes. It's hard.
It's hard.
It's a learning process.
It's a process.
It's one of life challenges to just really do that. But I think there's something to be said for exactly that example he uses. I mean, at the point where you're ready, that whether you win or lose, it's no big deal, and even winning is no big deal. That's when you're going to win.
Exactly.
And when for me, it took me getting to the point where creating a really successful enterprise would be basically I feel like I'm just doing what I'm supposed to do.
Well, it's as easy as hard as you make it, right?
Right. Just humbly going in and just doing what I'm supposed to do. And when these great things happen, which from the outside, this person who didn't know me, wants me to react like I won the lottery. I feel very blessed, but this was part of the fucking
that
plan.
That happens in poker a lot, where acquaintances, they see or they hear about the big win that you have. So they might hear that Matt won $130,000. They don't experience the terrible sessions where everything goes wrong and you lose money. They don't know that. They don't think about the taxes you're paying on that money or the money you lost leading up to that score, and they just see that result and think that it came so easy.
Because if that result came down on a parachute to them, they would be flipping out, doing a jig, dancing, but they hadn't taken.
I think there's a certain demographic of people that make a lot of excuses, and they're almost making an excuse when they ask you how it feels, because it's like all this lucky stuff happened to Aubrey. Like, how does it feel to be so lucky? And it takes luck to be successful, but it also takes a whole lot of hard work. And the luck comes with it, but all you can control is the time that you put into each project.
Well, I mean, as you said, you've been here 2 days out of the 3 months.
Yeah,
traveling. And
that's it.
Working.
Oh yeah, I mean it's a grind emotionally and physically and all that, but it's also look, I'm getting to do exactly what I would want to do if I was going to carve it out. I mean, Dana White has a pretty sweet job too, but other than a few specific cases, Rogan's got a good gig, of course, but
I'm sure there's a time where it wasn't that good. It wasn't as good as it looks.
Of course, and even still, it's not. I've seen how hard these guys work, and everybody. There's another side to all of that as well. But look, I'm really living. I'm living the dream. But I think that the key thing that I remember is that. You achieve these things. It's kind of almost unfortunate, but when you achieve them, at the point you achieve them, you've been expecting to achieve them for a long time because you've had the confidence and the belief. Like Bruce Lipton saying in The Power of Belief, you've believed that that's where you were going to go. That's where you were going to be for so long that if you truly believe that you're going to get somewhere, which is the only way you are going to get somewhere, by the time you get there, it's not a surprise anymore.
Well, even that big poker win I mentioned, like I said, in the eyes of a lot of people around me, it changed. I went from a degenerate to a poker player. But in my mind, for a year or two before, I knew that I had that skill.
You knew you were there.
I knew I was there. It's just I didn't have the results to prove it, but I knew that I had the skill to do it.
And that's key. Belief.
Yeah, and to add on to what he said about that, he basically said it has to not mean anything to you.
Yeah.
And I was like, wait a second. I was like, hang on. I was like, so I wouldn't get the rush of winning. He's like, no, it just means that you could have it or not have it, and it's fine. and I was just like, whoa, you're blowing my mind right now.
Yeah.
But it's true. It's like when I don't care, when I don't look at prize pools, is when I win. Mm-hmm. When I look at prize pools is when I don't do as well. And it's like that with business. It's like that with anything. It's like you almost have to expect it to happen, and it has to not be the end of the road for you. It just has to be a normal thing in your life.
And that comes back to what we said about the end game of poker is where you really make all your money, because human nature is for people to slow down and get more conservative and think about the first place prize pool and play worse as a result. So when you're in that deep in a tournament, if you can turn that off and you can just think about how do I play this hand to take advantage of everyone else at the table, you're going to have the results that come with it without necessarily
thinking about the first place prize pool.
Yeah.
You know, it comes when it's out of your mind, not when it's the first thing that you're thinking about.
I especially think that mushrooms would be good for that, because when you start thinking about money on mushrooms,
So I just don't know that I could sit. Could I sit still for 8 hours or whatever? That would be, I think, the biggest issue. Is you're sitting for an hour and 55 minutes out of every 2 hours.
There's only one way to try. So, you
gotta just do it.
There's the challenge. You know, we won't tell people when, but you know, I think it's worth giving a try. Or the iboga, small doses. You don't want to go over the top. You're going to be in a world of hurt. You're going to be in a world of hurt if you do a little bit. If you overshoot, on the iboga experience, you're going to be in trouble.
You don't want to puke at the table.
No, that's
Clean
not
up on table 7.
Yeah, that's not ideal. Well, you can't even see anything. It's it's fucking. It's a bad.
Or whatever bodily fluids it might be.
Yeah, whatever it is.
You don't want it on the table.
Well, Vengrin Brothers, this was a real pleasure to have you on. Where can people find you if they want to hear more? You got some Twitter accounts? You got any blogs or anything like that you want to tell people about?
No blogs right now. I'm Vengrin J on Twitter. Matt's
Matt Vengrin on Twitter. Buy Poker with a Purpose. It's $10. 20 of the best poker players in the world. 100% of the money goes to charity.
Also, we've been writing articles.
Poker with a Purpose. Where can they get that?
Amazon.com. It's only an ebook because the charity we chose this time was planting trees, so it made sense not to cut them down to make it.
Makes sense.
We've also been writing a lot of articles for Ultimate Poker, which is a site that Matt can tell you actually more about.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. So Ultimate Poker, we're writing some articles now for Ultimate Poker, which is owned by the Fertitas, I believe. I mean, it's their company. The Station Casino owners, great guys from what I hear, and lucky to be in that boat.
Lorenzo is a avid Alpha Brain user.
Is he?
Also, as I know you guys are quite familiar with.
Yes.
But he raves about that stuff. We got to get Dana on it, and maybe he'll waive the UFC sponsorship fee.
Yeah, no kidding, right? Well, I will say this: it definitely makes a difference for poker, for sure. It just makes things like my thoughts, it makes them more clear. It just makes it like my gut comes to me quicker than normal. I don't have to wade through all the bullshit thoughts that go through the head. It just kind of, helps with that. So,
Right on. Well, thanks, guys. As of always, Warrior Poet Project is brought to you by onnit.com, ONNIT.com. You can use my personal code WARRIOR to save 12% and trump everybody else. Why? Because I can. Code Warrior, onnit.com. Thanks, everybody. We'll be back again soon. Hopefully, I'll get this new podcast studio done, and we'll be back to the full video, audio experience as you're used to.
Aubrey, one more question.
Shoot.
How's it feel?
Wish I could tell you. Feels good. No doubt about it. I feel very blessed. All right, guys. Take care.